Great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 2024 OnFarm Applied Research and Monitoring OnFarm Forum. My name is Dr. Bronwyn Wilton, and I'm the Principal and Lead Consultant of Wilton Consulting Group. My team is very pleased to be supporting the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association with today's event. Before we begin our program, we do wish to recognize the long history of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Ontario and show respect today to their traditional territory on which we live and work. Please note that the forum is being recorded and will be posted on the OnFarm website. My team will also be creating a summary report that OSCIA will share on the OnFarm website later in March. So we have a full agenda, an engaging agenda for this morning. First, we will hear some welcoming remarks and learn about the work underway through the OnFarm program. We'll then move to a discussion of aggregate stability and dig into the connections between soil health and water runoff. A panel will also dig into the management of water in crop production. And to close our session off this morning, we have Dr. Adrian Correndo, who will explore practical tools to share agricultural research data and results. And we'll wrap our time up together by noon today. As we have a large group here today, we ask that all attendees please keep their sound and video off. Our speakers will turn on their sound and video for their presentations. We would like to encourage you to use the chat box throughout the forum, and I mean throughout the forum. You're free to add some chats and anytime, questions, comments, anything like that. And if you could just make sure that your first name and last name or last initial are on your Zoom profile, that will help us facilitate the discussion as we go through the morning together. And to get the chat started off, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and to enter any questions you have for the speakers and panelists as we go. It's always nice if you can send a few little intros in the chat and just let people know where you're joining in from. In the past forums, we've had people from all across Ontario, which is nice to see the geographical distribution. So please feel free to do that at any time now. And we also have, for the certified crop advisors joining us today, you are eligible to receive continuing education units for your participation in the forum. And this event is also an OSCIA recognized knowledge sharing event, or KSE, for Ontario farmers with the On-Farm Climate Action Fund, or OFCAF, projects in the cover cropping category. And we will share the QR codes at the end of the event for everybody to get all the links you need to get those credits as you need them. And next, I would like to welcome Dr. Angela Stradoff, the Director of Research and Knowledge Transfer at OSCIA. So Angie, over to you.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Good morning, everyone. It is so gratifying to see the number of folks on the call this morning interested in learning more about the OnFarm program, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to tell you about it here today. So as Bronwyn mentioned, my name is Angie Stradoff. I'm the Director of Research and Knowledge Transfer with OSCIA, and OSCIA has been delivering the OnFarm program since 2019 in cooperation with our partners, who I'll give a shout out to in a moment. So OnFarm began in 2019. It was an initiative that came out of previous monitoring that had been established in priority sub-watersheds under the Great Lakes Agricultural Stewardship Initiative. And it was designed to implement some of the recommendations of Ontario's Soil Health and Conservation Strategy. With OnFarm set to continue through to 2028 with funding from the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, this means OnFarm will become a 9-year research initiative, which is really critical. And I'll get into it a bit more this morning, why that longevity is so important for the indicators that we're measuring at the OnFarm sites. So obviously at Soil and Crop, we were just thrilled to hear the program will be continuing. And we're really grateful to our partners at OMAFRA for trusting us with the continuation of this program. We get to continue working with conservation authorities and the Soil Resource Group, and you'll hear from those folks later on this morning. And I'll be announcing some new partnerships as well, which we're really excited to leverage and in order to expand the scope and reach and relevance of the program. So OnFarm is really hinged around 3 pillars. They are soil health, water quality, and engagement. And in studying soil health, and as ONFARM continues, we'll be testing best management practices that are implemented at paired plot trials across Ontario and measuring the response of soil health indicators to the implementation of those practices. We'll also be testing those practices at field sites that have surface water running adjacent to them. And those are called edge of field sites, where we monitor how what is going on in the field impacts the quality of the water leaving the field edge. But also, as ONFARM continues, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into how those practices impact how soil is using and retaining that water to promote crop resiliency and field productivity. And finally, a really critical pillar is engagement. And that's exactly what brings us all here this morning. We want to cultivate these opportunities to not only share with stakeholders and farmers and the Ontario agricultural industry what ONFARM is producing and the results that are coming out of it, but also create opportunities to hear from you. What is your reaction to these results, and what does it mean for your own operations? So that's where we really center engagement as an opportunity for two-way communication between the program and the program's partners and the people who the results are most important to ultimately. So this is just a snapshot of the on-farm site locations. You'll see they're spread across Southern Ontario, and we were really trying to capture geographical diversity. And in doing so, we also get a range of soil types and farm types, farm sizes, and commodities that are involved in the program. And so we all know how diverse and unique Ontario operations are across the province. So we're really trying to capture a snapshot of that diversity when Soil Resource Group was working to select the sites that we did land on. So the sites you'll see in dark orange are our edge of field trial sites. That's where I mentioned the water quality indicators are being measured. And you'll hear from our Conservation Authority partners later this morning what they've been finding at those sites. And the yellow sites are where we're implementing the soil health trials and measuring those soil health indicators. So the water quality monitoring, as I mentioned, was kind of began under ONFARM as a continuation of priority subwatershed sites that have been established under the Great Lakes Agricultural Stewardship Initiative. As ONFARM continues, you have 8 edge of field sites where overland flow or tile runoff is monitored alongside in-stream water quality and quantity results. And these results are going to help us draw conclusions on what the best management practices impact on these sites actually are. And the best management practices we're looking at include cover cropping, different levels of conservation tillage, and also the incorporation of nutrient sources such as fertilizer or manure. Similar best management practices are being tested at the soil health trials across the province. And this is really to improve our understanding, again, of how these practices are impacting soil health, getting regional diversity across these sites to understand how, not only how the best management practices are impacting the indicators that we are measuring, and I'll describe those in a moment, but are the BMPs practical to implement? Are they meaningful for the farmer, and do they have cost benefit once they're actually trialed? So we've evaluated a whole suite of soil health indicators and methods to identify them across all of these sites and dive deeper into their measurement as the program continues. Sorry. So the on-farm cooperators are really the key to the success of this program. they worked very collaboratively as Soil Resource Group was developing trial treatments in order to select practices that really make sense on their own operation, and that these cooperators were intrinsically motivated to test. So are these practices something they would do in real life anyway? And it was obviously critical that we were testing not only practices that that were important to Ontario, but that made sense for the operation that they were being trialed on. So each of these sites has paired plots running parallel to each other along a hill slope, and that's to also capture any impact that landscape variability may have on the soil properties at the site that's where the indicators are being measured from. And each trial compares treatments of either cover crops or organic amendments or some stacked situation of those practices under varying levels of conservation tillage at each site. And they're sampled from composite samples, so cores that are taken in triplicate at each of these locations that was benchmarked at the slope position at the first sampling of the site. So the indicators we're most interested in measuring are obviously things that resonate with farmers. So your kind of traditional soil fertility, organic matter levels, and key pedological indicators that were taken at the baseline sampling in 2018. Sorry, 19. But you'll see in blue, we're also really interested in what we're calling novel soil health indicators. So these are less typically measured in commercial labs, but critical to understanding how soil biology and chemistry and physical properties interact with each other and are impacted by the best management practices. And of course, we want to understand how all of these lead to productivity, yield, and so we're measuring agronomic indicators throughout the growing season and at harvest as well. So some of the key takeaways that we had from the first 3 field seasons of measurement in the program is that texture and slope position are really critical variables in helping us contextualize the response of indicators to the best management practices. So what you see on the screen here is actually a screenshot from our data dashboard that was developed so that folks like you could go in and really interact with the data itself. So this image here shows how pH it has a relationship with cation exchange capacity, but how those properties are also kind of sensitive to the soil texture that's being measured at each site. So I'd encourage you to go to the ONFARM website and explore the data dashboard. You can look at sites that have similar characteristics to your own soil properties on your operation, and understand a bit better the relationship between those properties and the best management practices that we're testing. I really want to give big credit here to our research data scientist, James Kober, who's made great effort in making this dashboard effective for people to interact with. And another thing we learned that was really important in positioning OnFarm for success as it continues over the next 4 years is that these soil health indicators are really dependent on time. And so we do have to have reasonable expectations in terms of the rate that they may respond to practice change or other environmental other environmental variables. So Soil Resource Group has created this really helpful graphic, which shows that what we looked at in OnFarm 1 was really just a snapshot of where the impact that practices could be having is headed on any of the cooperator sites. So you'll see seasonal variability and you'll see annual variability in the levels of these indicators that we're measuring. But what's most important is that we're tracking this trend over time. And that's why we're just thrilled that OnFarm will be continuing with support from Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, because it's that longevity of data collection that helps us draw more convincing conclusions. And we know soils have inherently high spatial variability, and these indicators have temporal variability as well. So this repetition is going to be really critical for supporting the conclusions the program is able to draw. I definitely want to encourage you to explore the resources that OnFarm has been producing over the past few years. So our reports are all available online at the OnFarm website. These include technical reports that highlight the edge of field results from the priority subwatersheds in the first run of the program, but also the dashboard that I mentioned. You can go and select indicators of interest to your own operation. We also will have the forum recording posted there and the forum report, and you can actually watch back all of the forum recordings and reports from the previous 4 years of the program as well from this site. So what's going to be coming on board as OnFarm continues into 2028? We're really excited about having the opportunity to, like I mentioned earlier, take a bit of a deeper dive into the relationship between these soil health indicators, the best management practices that are being applied, and how water is being stored or retained and supporting productivity at these sites. So that's what our panel is going to dive into a bit later this morning. And we're really excited to be able to study these relationships, as we know extreme events are going to increase in their frequency in the coming years. We're also going to be diving a little deeper into the economics of these practices. So what is the cost benefit, and are they readily implementable from an economic perspective for the farmer? Because of course, all of this has to be done under a lens of profitability and with the farm's long-term operation viability in mind. We are very excited to be expanding the program into Northeastern Ontario. So I'm sure many of you noticed the snapshot of sites across Southern Ontario left out a really big chunk of the province. And with the opportunity to move 2 sites into that region, we're just going to expand our ability to understand regional and climate impacts across a broader spectrum of Ontario farming operations. And finally, we're forging new partnerships. So we're really excited to be working with Terra Nova UAV to conduct some drone imaging of the on-farm cooperator sites. And this will help us understand how plant physiological responses could also be related to the best management practices implemented in the strip trials at the cooperator sites. Between NDVI and LiDAR imaging, we're going to be just getting that much more insight from an aerial perspective. And the cooperators are also really excited about where this relationship is heading and the level of data they'll be getting back about their sites. We're also continuing our partnership with Syngenta Canada and delivering Operation Pollinator to on-farm cooperators. And of course, Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association is also the delivery partner with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada for the Living Lab Ontario program. And we'll be looking for a lot of opportunities to amplify some synergies between these 2 applied research initiatives. So I really want to thank all of our partners. You'll hear from many of them later this morning. Thanks to my colleagues at OSCIA and to Wilton Consulting Group for facilitating the event this morning. I think you're all in for a treat in terms of the content we've lined up for you today. And at this time, I will turn it over to my colleague from OMAFRA, Cale Selby. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the forum.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Angie and Bronwyn. And a huge thank you to everyone that's taken the time out of your schedule to attend today's event. I know folks were thinking that there may be between 30 and 50 people. It sounds like when I was talking to OSCA earlier in the week that there were upwards of 250 people that have signed up. So it's fantastic to see the interest and ongoing interest in place for ONFARM. I hope you find today very entertaining, very engaging, very informative, but most of all, I really hope people come away with some tangible ideas on how they can either be part of ONFARM or really think about how ONFARM can integrate and improve the work that you're doing in your own organizations or on your own farms. As someone who's been involved in ONFARM since its inception, I'm really, really proud to see where everyone has taken the program, the commitment that folks have, and as Angie mentioned, to its longevity, which is really, really important to what we're trying to build our understanding around in ONFARM. It's a really important program. I see in a number of ways. It's significantly strengthening our understanding, as Angie talked about, in terms of the efficacy of best management practices on farm for soil health, for water quality. But most importantly, it's focused on Ontario farms, Ontario weather conditions, and within Ontario's agricultural natural systems, which is really important for us all to understand what do the solutions look like within and for Ontario's farms. This type of monitoring is going to become more and more important as we look to the future and as we're all experiencing changing weather patterns and experiencing more extreme and more frequent weather events. So really excited to see how we will continue to integrate and learn the effects of the severe weather conditions that we're experiencing and how that's playing out in the pieces that we're monitoring with ONFARM. I'm really, really happy to share that the long-term monitoring that was established in 2019 through ONFARM continues to be a really important priority for OMAFRA, which is why we have invested through our partnership with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada $7 million over the next 4 years to expand ONFARM and continue to build and grow on the foundation that has been established over the last number of years. You will see ONFARM as a really important priority identified in a number of Ontario's policy documents and policy priorities. It's front and center in the Grow Ontario strategy, which is really this government strategy laying out how we will work with and together with Ontario's agri-food sector and really important places we see for growth and investment. It's a really important part of Ontario's soil health and conservation strategy. It's an integral part of the Canada-Ontario Lake Area Action Plan, as well as a really important part of our broader commitments relating to Great Lakes water quality and ecosystem health. So we've made sure that the longevity will remain important through each of these policy documents and continuing to iterate its importance. As Angie mentioned, a couple of things I'm really excited about is to see the program expanding into the north and continuing our learnings into the north and what it means for agriculture in Ontario's north. Really excited to see the continued commitment to expanding the partnerships and bringing new and non-traditional partnerships to the program. But most of all, I want to just take a moment to recognize OSA's leadership in ONFARM, and not just ONFARM, but across the primary agriculture sector and really becoming a strong hub for collaboration around primary agriculture and soil health. And so they continue to be a really important partner for OMAFRA, both in terms of ONFARM, but broader in terms of cost share support, in terms of the connections that they bring to the programs that we all work on and deliver. And so really looking forward to seeing OSA's leadership as ONFARM continues over the next 4 years. I was at their AGM earlier this week and was really happy to see a resolution put forward that was really focused on greater connection and collaboration and synergies across research programs. So Angie mentioned living labs, but there's also a broad spectrum of research investment that's happening across Ontario that can build on and learn from and integrate with the learnings from on-farm. I know grain farmers of Ontario have significant research priorities and investments. We have our University of Guelph Alliance partnership, just to name a few, but there are many, many researchers and collaborators that are operating in this space. And so really challenge us all to think about how do we continue to integrate and bring the collective findings together and use them to inform how we work and to inform and support producers as they make decisions to address some of the challenges and opportunities that they're facing. I really see OSCAA positioned well as a strong collaborating and coordinating force in this area, and look forward to seeing how that plays out as Living Labs gets extended and as we continue to shape on-farm. To me, a big part of this is really thinking about data and data sharing and making the data and information as widely available as possible and the learnings that come from on-farm. And I really appreciated hearing from Angie at the AGM that OSCA is getting a lot of reach out and questions and interest in using the data connected to broader research and monitoring happening in Ontario. So that's fantastic. Beyond OSCAA, and Angie talked about this, success for a program this big and with this kind of longevity always comes from the networks and partners that are engaged. And I know conservation authorities play a critical role. I know Soil Resource Group continues to be a really important partner and a leader in how we're working. Had many conversations this summer over the baseball field with Soil Resource Group, so it's really neat to see the conversations happening even out in the community. But also beyond this, to me, one of the most important success factors, as Angie mentioned, for on-farm is the cooperating farms and the willingness of farmers to participate, make their farms available, try, test, work on innovation, and make those learnings accessible to their communities, to their neighbors, and to all of us to help us make better and more informed decisions as we look ahead. Finally, I'll just share that OMAFR continues to be a really important partner beyond just funding. We have technical expertise that continues to be involved in the partnership, and would extend an invitation to continue these conversations beyond today with OMAFR staff, and just put out there that we are more than willing to have conversations around how do we continue to grow and support and evolve and invest in this really important program. Finally, just a huge thanks to the organizers. It always takes a lot of work behind the scenes to bring together an event like this. So a big thank you to everyone that was involved in putting today together. And I'll just leave you with, I hope it's a fantastic session and that you all come away with ideas and thoughts and connections that we can build on going forward. Thanks so much, and Bronwyn, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cale, and thank you, Angie, for your opening remarks, and Cale for those comments. It's really great to see OMAFR's ongoing support for the long-term monitoring, and really nice to hear that on-farm is such an important priority in things like Grow Ontario and other policy programs. So super to hear all of that and all of the support, and I would just pick up on your challenge for this morning to talk about how we can further integrate and collaborate across the province and across research and farmers and everybody. So I think that's a really important point to that. And that's what the point of the forum is, to really share some of the things that have been learned through on-farm and how we can continue to build those collaborations and research partnerships. So thank you for that, putting that challenge out. And with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Andrea Gall to introduce our next session. So Andrea, over to you.
Thanks, Bronwyn. It's great to participate in the forum and really looking forward to digging into the conversations today. In our next session, we are going to explore how BMPs improve aggregate stability and learn about the SLIKES app. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'd like to encourage participants to post any questions you have in the chat. We've had some good conversation going there already. We'll have an opportunity for our speakers to answer questions after their presentations and panel discussions. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Reiki, who is a soil microbiome scientist at the Soil Health Institute. Welcome, Dr. Reiki.
Great, thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for having me today. Really happy to be here with you all. So today, yeah, I'll be talking a little bit about assessing soil health with aggregate stability. So to start off, I'll share a couple little slides going over why we really like aggregate stability, why we recommend it is one of our indicators. Then, as Andrea mentioned, I'll kind of go through a cheap and easy method of measuring aggregate stability that you can do yourself. And then finally, I'll share some data, on-farm data from the Greenbelt region using the SLAKES app. Let's see here. Okay, so at the Soil Health Institute, when we think about assessing soil health, we really think about two main questions. The first being, is the management that we're selecting moving our soil towards a healthier target? So can we find indicators of progress over time as we adopt new practices? The second question is the soil performing its job to the best of its ability? And when we think about the soil performing its job, we think about different functions that the soil performs. So everything from storing carbon, cycling nitrogen, water storage and infiltration, erosion resistance, disease suppression, all these different great things that the soil can do. So how do we link things that we can measure to these actual on-site functions? So in 2019, a team of scientists, including myself, set out on the North American project to evaluate soil health measurements. And the main goal of this project was to identify the most effective indicators of soil health. You can see the map on the right. Each of the little black dots indicates one of the 124 long-term experimental sites that we measured in the as part of the project. So we selected these sites based on their inclusion of different long-term paired treatments. So these were things that included differences in tillage, so reduced tillage versus full width tillage, cover crops versus no cover crops, extended crop rotations versus monocultures. And we took samples from each of these treatments from 0 to 15 centimeters. We took these soils and we sent them to 5 different laboratories to evaluate over 30 different current and exploratory soil health measurements. So lots to look at. How do we whittle these down into something that we can support and actually get people to measure at scale, right? So after obtaining all the data, we took those 30 different measurements and we applied them through a series of different filters. So that first filter was, is the measurement kind of primarily reflecting soil health? And so with that, we used literature. We cut out those that are primarily fertility measurements and ancillary measurements that help interpret soil health indicators such as soil texture. Next, we looked at, were the indicators responsive to management practices? So mentioning those, were they responsive to cover cropping? Were they responsive to reduced tillage? After that filter, we looked at, are these remaining indicators applicable at scale? Are they available at commercial labs, or is it something you can measure yourself? What is the pricing of it? Is it available, but will it, cost $100 per sample? That's not something we really want to recommend. So with that, we were able to whittle more down. And then finally, what we did is we wanted to make sure that with what we had left, that they weren't redundant, the indicators weren't redundant with more direct interpretation. So if we're measuring soil organic carbon, for instance, do we really need to measure something that's getting at soil organic carbon if we do have soil organic carbon? So in all, that left us with our minimum suite of effective indicators for North America. And one of those that I'm primarily going to hit on today, obviously, is aggregate stability. But if you are interested in learning more about soil organic carbon or carbon mineralization potential, you feel free to reach out after the presentation. So why do we really like aggregate stability so much? The pictures on the right side of the screen were taken on the same day at plots in 2019 in Western Oregon. The picture on the right, the picture on the right was taken from a minimally managed perennial system, and the picture on the left was taken in a wheat fallow system with intensive tillage. And you can just see how well that perennial system was able to capture that water based on its soil structure. So soil structure, we believe, is really kind of the backbone of soil health. Without soil structure, there's not the habitat for the organisms to perform all the different things that are so important to soil health, carbon and nutrient cycling, water storage, all of these great things that we depend on soil for. So that's, a really strong tip in the hat to aggregate stability. Next, the indicator is really biologically driven. So both fungal hyphae and bacterial biofilms both enhance aggregate formation and their stability. So the more of these kind of biological residues that are there kind of holding together these soil particles, all of that increases your aggregate stability. So it's really not just a measure of soil structure, but also an indicator of biological activity as well. And finally, it has been linked, the indicator has been linked to improved water infiltration and reduced erosion. And if you don't believe it, just look at those two pictures on the right side of the screen. And then with that, I'd like to mention that, so as part of that big project and that whittling down of, these different indicators, we did actually look at 4 different indicators of aggregate stability that are out there in research and commercial labs. And what we kind of came down to was they all perform fairly well as far as response to management. But when looking at availability and pricing, we really, the clear winner kind of was the Slakes app, which I'll get into more in the next few slides. But it's an easy and affordable way to measure aggregate stability yourself using a smartphone. So if you're interested in using the Slakes app yourself, the first step is to go out and collect and dry some aggregates. So what you do is you go out and remove an intact clod from the top 2 inches of soil, similar to what you see in the picture on the right, and then just gently break apart pea-sized aggregates. And then, so once you have this kind of pea-sized aggregates, you can either place them on a plate or in a paper sack to dry overnight. So once you have your aggregates dried, the next step is setting up the smartphone to capture the analysis. So all in all, you just need a smartphone and a mount approximately 4 to 6 inches tall. So you could use a peanut butter jar, a can of soup, really anything, just something to mount that phone to be able to look over those aggregates, which sit in a clear plastic dish. So on the example on the right in the picture, we're using Petri dishes, but a clear Tupperware container, something like that, as long as it's deep enough to put the aggregates in and cover it with water, you're good to go. So once you have your phone mounted above a clear plastic dish, you select 3 of those pea-sized aggregates and you place them in a dish. Then you just fill a second dish with water to get ready for the actual test itself. And on the app, on your smartphone, all you have to do is you tap Start Aggregate Stability Test. You enter your sample ID. The app itself will actually ask you to capture an initial image of the dry soil in that first Petri dish that you have there, and then gently transfer those aggregates to the water-filled dish to take a second picture and start it, which actually starts. So after 10 minutes, the app automatically captures the final image to complete the test, and your aggregate stability index value is displayed on the app. So the image on the right is a screenshot of what it looks like when, after that 10 minutes. So you see that index value up on the top there. And really what that index value is it's a ratio of the area of that initial image to that final image. So the greater the index value, the greater your aggregate stability. And then you can see there you have the option to either delete the test or go ahead and test another sample. So once you're all done testing all the samples that you have, the next step, if you'd like to do it, you can actually export your results to a computer. So you can upload them onto a computer as a CSV file. You can add your own management and location data. And with this, you can really track changes in aggregate stability index values, either over time or between different management practices. And so once again, the screenshot on the right is from the app. It's pretty much what you would see after you ran a few tests, but I think it's pretty slick as far as being able to collect some data yourself. So now I'd like to briefly share a little bit of aggregate stability data collected using the SLAKES app as part of the Greenbelt Soil Health Testing Program. So this is a 4-year partnership between the Greenbelt Foundation and the Soil Health Institute. And if you have questions after the presentation, feel free to reach out and I can get you in contact with the primary Soil Health Institute scientist, Dr. Jenny Bauer. She is looking for farms to sample, I believe primarily in the Niagara, York, and Durham regions in 2024. So if you're interested in having your soil health measured, please reach out after the presentation. But just a little bit of background on the project. It is funded and supported by the Weston Family Foundation's Soil Health Initiative and the Government of Ontario. And so the project is primarily looking to observe and monitor soil health and grain and oilseed farms in the Golden Horseshoe region. So the first 2 years are primarily spent on using benchmarking tools to kind of categorize and see where, soil health is in relation to, these kind of best of the best locations out there, which I'll get into in the next slide or two. And then in years 3 and 4, there's still going to be primarily on-farm testing to track changes due to different management practices. So in 2020, this is data collected from the project in 2023 with the goal of understanding how different management practices affect aggregate stability in this instance. So you'll see 3 different lines on the figure on the right. The kind of gold line are what we grouped as baseline samples, you would say. So these are farms that were sampled with no soil health management practices. The blue line then on the chart are farms or samples that were collected from farms with soil health management practices. So these are farms that had at least 5 years of reduced or no tillage and cover cropping. And then finally, that green line up towards the top there, those are reference or undisturbed perennial systems. So these are kind of, these are samples that are pulled from locations that represent all of the different great soil health management practices. That so, keeping the soil covered, really no disturbance, chemically or physically, all those good things to really see, what is kind of, the upper tier of where we can measure aggregate stability in the horseshoe region. So the graph itself, what it's showing is modeled results of those 168 locations that were sampled. So these are on the x-axis, you'll see percent sand, and then on the y-axis, you'll see aggregate stability. So one thing that was already mentioned this morning is that we do need to keep, texture and climate in context when we're measuring these different soil health indicators. And so what we saw is that, you do see, based on your texture on that x-axis, you do see differences in those values, especially in, those really finely textured soils towards the left-hand picture there. But really what we're trying to get at is to show that between those reference date systems and those baseline farms that were sampled, the aggregate stability values were 1.4 times higher in those reference systems. And similarly, what we see is the soil health management systems, they're moving towards that target. Those are 1.2 times higher than those farms that were sampled on average that had no soil health management practices. So we can see that, measuring aggregate stability, we do know that it's linked to functional outcomes, but we are seeing that, with soil health management practices, we are capable of moving towards a goal. So kind of to put it all together and wrap up, really make sure when you're going out and measuring aggregate stability to take into context local climate, soil texture, and management, because they all do impact values of this indicator. So we do, really only want to compare similar soils. Local technicians, CCAs, different folks can help out and make sure that you're doing that correctly. And then finally, please go check out the Slakes app. It's available for free in the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. And big shout out to our collaborators at the University of Sydney who kind of have helped us kind of come out with a kind of updated version of their initial work from about a decade ago. So we're really excited about it. Happy to answer questions. The QR code on the right side of the screen will link you to information on the SHI website about all things aggregate stability. And there, I believe, are also links to the Google Play Store and Apple App Store if you are interested in downloading the Slakes app. So with that, thanks again. And yeah, happy to answer a couple questions.
Thanks, Liz. It's so great to hear about the work underway at the Soil Health Institute and to chat about such a practical tool for farmers using things that they've got already in their households to be able to do this testing. With this, we'll take one question that's come in from the audience at this stage. So building on your final point there that you shared about the local climate, soil texture, and management all impacting aggregate stability values, someone is curious if you could chat a little bit about whether you applied a latitude lens to the aggregate stability data, particularly through the winter and the spring. They were explaining that in many of our soils, as the soil is thawing, the surface structure breaks down into a thick slurry, but then the stable structure reforms as the soil dries.
Sure. Yeah. So that's one thing for sure. You don't want to go out first. You don't want to go out and take a sample when your soil is saturated. It's, moisture is fine, but if it's really saturated, if you're not able to go out and break apart those aggregates, then it's probably not the best time to go pull a sample. We primarily recommend thinking about what makes sense for you as far as sample timing throughout the agronomic calendar, and then being consistent. So, really not trying to sample right after a primary management event. So, after fertilization or tillage or, residue incorporation, any of those things to get the best picture of the measurement. I hope that helps, I guess. But yeah, the latitude lens, so sampling isn't going to occur at the best time or at the same time for everybody, right? So for instance, in 2019, we started sampling at lower latitudes and worked our way north throughout the growing season. So yeah, whatever works best for you. It's, not a one size fits all for sure.
Perfect, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for that additional context. And with that, I think we can introduce the conservation authorities, and we'll have time to circle back to Dr. Riki and the conservation authorities after they give their presentation. So next, I'd like to introduce the representatives of the 3 conservation authorities working on ONFARM. Donna Small is the Agricultural Program Coordinator for the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority. Mary Valise is the Healthy Watersheds Manager at Asabo Bayfield Conservation Authority. And Tatiana Lozier is the Stewardship Services Coordinator at the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. Welcome, Donna, Mary, and Tatiana. We look forward to learning more about the research that you have underway through ONFARM.
Thanks, Andrea. All right, I'm actually going to kick off our presentation by doing a quick review of where we've left off if you joined us in past years. In the first phase of ONFARM, the conservation authorities were monitoring at a few different spatial scales at the subwatershed and the edge of field scale across different regions, so from Huron County down through Essex. So we know that monitoring at the subwatershed level is important to understand long-term trends and cumulative impacts of what is happening across the landscape on water quality. And this will continue to be an important scale of how we understand local water quality trends over time. From this, we know that the winter is an important period for water quality. as the largest sediment and nutrient losses occur during the winter on an annual basis. So the bars under the snowflakes in the graph on the screen. So we've seen events where a third of our annual phosphorus load can be lost in 2 to 3 day events during the winter months. So we know from a water quality perspective, we need BMPs that are effective during this time. It's the understanding of the effectiveness of BMPs that's not picked up at the subwatershed level. Even if we do multiple BMPs within a subwatershed, that gets diluted by the numerous complexities of all the land use inputs above where we monitor at that scale. So when we want to really understand how effective any BMP can be, we really need to focus on an even smaller scale, so the field scale. So that's where we're focusing our efforts on Farm 2, and then we can begin to scale up from there. So this is just a few examples of the edge of field setup. So it's different across different sites, but we capture where and how water is leaving the field. So we're monitoring tile and/or surface runoff. The edge of field scale allows us to tease out the water quality piece and tie that to the use of different BMPs or land management. So we have more information to explain the results that we may be seeing. And it allows us to begin to look at other factors. So water quantity, soil health, yield. So start to tie together the environmental, agronomic, and economic pieces of the practice, start to piece those together. And I did want to acknowledge that some of our edge of field water quality sites have existed in various forms for over 10 years, so before ONFARM. So there has been a long-term commitment from a number of our cooperators on letting numerous parties use their fields and work with us to change practices to allow for these research opportunities. Angie already reviewed this map, but I just want to re-highlight that the conservation authorities are working at the dark orange locations. So these sites are being used to run BMP trials, so looking at both water quality and quantity impacts, as well as soil health benefits on field management and drainage BMPs. So we're looking at overwinter cover or cover crops, nutrient management, tillage, and there's 2 sites, controlled drainage and contour drainage versus free drainage site. So a suite of different BMPs ongoing at the different conservation authority sites. So what do we need to understand better? Well, we have a few questions going into this second phase of ONFARM. What field conditions generate water, and how do they differ across different locations with the same BMPs or different BMPs? Can these conditions be modified with management or stacking of BMPs? And can we relate soil health indicators to the ability of fields to retain water or improve water quality, understanding the complexity of understanding soil health itself, and then linking those soil health properties to water quality and quantity. So what we're learning, and I touched on this a bit, is that we really need this small scale to understand differences. So that allows us to get a sense of what pieces of the puzzle we're missing to further understand and answer the questions that we have. It allows us to overlap different perspectives between the different partners on ONFARM and in the audience, in terms of what your number one question or concerns are that you want answered. And it allows us to look at trade-offs. So in order to achieve what we're looking for or looking to answer in our own areas of focus, so water quality, water quantity for the conservation authorities, for example, how does that influence the co-benefits and everything that ties together? So where do those trade-offs exist, and what can we do to manage them? So I mentioned that overwinter cover, the use of cover crops as a BMP, is one of the trials. So there's 3 sites that are looking at this. At the North Kettle edge of field site, looking at cover crop versus no cover crop and monitoring tile and surface runoff combined. So it's actually split by a T-shaped berm that allows us to have trials on 2 different sides of the farm. So looking at the growing season versus the non-growing season between cover crop and no cover crop, so the left and right and the green and blue in the chart there, the results are not all that different between seasons or between trials so far, with the exception of a few outliers during the non-growing season. And I think this might be more of a result of tillage, so the actual establishment of the cover crop, being broadcast and incorporated, and then the no cover crop side having also been worked. So seeing the impacts of tillage rather than the benefit of cover crop during the non-growing season. And the cooperator has looked at different options to establish the cover crop earlier. It's a bit of an interesting opportunity because it's a sweet corn and soybean rotation, so we can get a cover crop in every year. The difficulty being that it's often seeded late, so establishment has been a little bit challenging for us. And so linking cover crop, no cover crop to water quality with a low establishment has also been a challenge. With that being said, this is the first year where we've had high residue on the cover crop side, which was due to weather-related crop loss. So the cover crop was planted earlier. So it does give us an opportunity to look at the differences in water quality, water quantity with high residue at this site, but this is not going to be a normal situation. So we need to look for opportunities to get the cover crop established earlier or at a higher seeding rate. And I did mention that there was 2 other sites looking at overwinter cover, so Asable and Lower Thames. So I'm hoping that I can take the lessons learned from those sites and start to look at opportunities to measure other impacts. And Mary's actually going to walk us through a few examples from Asable Bayfield looking at flow, no flow, which we've just incorporated the equipment at the North Kettle site to be able to tease out those differences. So just an opportunity to look at different tools or metrics to tell that BMP effectiveness story. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to Mary.
Thanks, Tatiana, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to spend a few minutes here talking a little bit about the different best practices being employed on fields in the Gully Creek area north of Bayfield and the Huron View demonstration farm just south of Clinton. So the first slides here are related to measuring vegetative cover. And we've been working in this field, as Tatiana mentioned, some of these fields go back 10 years, so since June 2013. And at the beginning of doing this work, it was very hard to link water quality results to vegetative cover, but we were observing that water flow differences on different crops at different times of the year. So we decided to look at a first principle, which is flow, no flow in these fields. And we, as Tatiana has already mentioned, the non-growing season seems to be the more important time from a water perspective. So October 1st to April 30th. And of course, I have here the number of events, so nearly 300 precipitation events, but not all of those events resulted in a flow being generated in the field. And so what is distinguishing those events from generating flow and not generating flow? So the first thing we started to look at was this, the crop system that was the crop that was present at the time of the rain event. And from this, we could see that certainly with the cover crop, we were getting instances of no flow more frequently than the flow events. So that's the lighter gray compared to the darker gray. And that was also the case in the soybean residue, where we saw more cover, where we saw less cover, we would have more flow events. And this is just, in this particular field, we have the opportunity to measure 2 water and sediment control basins within the same field. And that set us up nicely for an experiment that we did. Tatiana, if you can turn to the next slide, please. In the winter of October 2020, 2021, we worked with the cooperator, and again, just how important working with these cooperators is. We asked him to harvest part of his peas and oats cover crop, which he didn't mind because he has dairy cows, so that worked out okay. And we could look at one of the basins to see what kind of flow generation and actually the water quality in this particular winter, to see what those results were in the unharvested and harvested plot. And you can see that in that particular winter, there were 3 rain events and 3 snowmelt events and 3 rain events. And in the harvested plot, more frequently, there was a flow event that we could measure compared to the unharvested plot. And when we did measure the runoff, we found that we did have half as much total phosphorus and TSS in the unharvested area compared to the harvested area. And of course, there was little difference, or not of course, but it seemed there was little difference in the dissolved phosphorus. So really, it's that sediment moving that we were able to capture. The next place is the Huron View tile drainage site. And this site, we're really mostly looking at the impact, the effects of different kinds of tile drainage on water quality and water quantity generation. But in the meantime, we're also able to look at other best practices such as cover. So here we have in the just before planting the 22 soybeans, we had a lush 8-way mix of a 40-pound cover crop blend, and we're very lush cover crop that overwintered. And we ended up planting the next year after the beans were harvested, we had 30 pounds of rye, and that didn't yield as much of a cover crop. So the following slides, I'll show you the nutrient concentrations in the tile water in the two fields during the winters that help us compare minimal and more complete coverage. We collected approximately 30 water quality samples from each field in each winter. So you can see in the fields, both of the fields that had the cover, we have lower water quality, and in the fields where we have the minimal cover, we have higher nitrate concentrations. Next slide, please. And where for phosphorus, the error bars here may mean that those differences are related to other in-field processes, but certainly we are beginning to see some trends with respect to phosphorus concentrations in the tile water. And the next slide. And the same with the sediment, but even higher error bars suggesting there are other processes as well happening in these fields. But certainly, certainly the water quality story is, we had an opportunity in this particular example to tell a bit of a water quality story over the last couple of years. The other thing that people are are interested in is the yield piece. And so on this map, I'm showing the yields following the soybean yields following the lush cover crop year or winter, and the corn yields following the minimal rye cover crop. And you can see the minimal cover crop, there wasn't much difference between the different fields. But with the lush cover crop, you can see the front two fields are quite a bit lower in the soybean yields than we would have hoped for. And in the back field, it was more along the lines of what we were anticipating. So I want to spend just a minute here to explain about the management of those fields. The front two fields were directly planted into a 6-foot high cover crop that had just been crimped and rolled. And the back field had been sprayed with Roundup and Enlist the day before, and then gone in with a strip tillage unit. So those yields are certainly more reflective of the kinds of yields that people would be hoping for. And it seems it's not a cover crop issue, it's the management of the cover that is the issue. So again, measuring off those trade-offs and managing for that is going to be important. The next slide is actually with the cover crop and yields in the Medway site. And this work just below the Y, you see the creek at the bottom in the yellow, the green line, that is where the Upper Thames Medway edge of field site is. And the other fields are showing check plots in the red where there was no cover crop, and looking at yields over time at different seeding rates. Yellow field was 40 pounds of rye. Blue field is 50 pounds of rye, and this is rye broadcast into cereal rye broadcast into soybeans in 2019, and then corn into 2020. And then the green field was 60 pounds of rye. And we've measured, or Tatiana's and her team measured no differences in the corn yields in the fall of 2020, and very, very little differences over time for the yield. Okay, I think the next slide is the piece about the soil. So overwinter cover and effects on soil. So of course, we're measuring with the SRG group soil in these fields, and just to distinguish between the inherent soil traits that are going to be apparent in these fields and the dynamic properties that are going to be more managed, more reflective of some of the management we hope. So we're not at this point, the soil conditions are going to seem to be reflecting systems, and we're not sure at this point if we're going to be able to tease out the overwinter cover piece from all the other activities. Next slide, please. And I'm in a view that's, thank you. Next slide, Tatiana, please. Thanks. This is some of the findings from the high level findings from the on-farm soil piece that, again, with the managing expectations, it's quite important to be patient. It's also noticed from the literature that the positive changes to soil do take some time. And comparing the cover crop with the organic amendments, we did see some impact improvements from the amendments in this time frame. One of the differences between the cover crop treatments, comparing those that also received manure, feeding these crops led to more biomass and better coverage on average. But again, we have to kind of manage our expectations around the quick wins. We know that at the water quality sites with management, it'll be very important to keep the 4R management strategies in mind. The right place, right source, rate, in particular time. With we found at the Huron View, we explained last year about the MAP application in the winter and how that did result in some extra nutrients in the tiles. And Donna will review some of the work in the Merlin site. But the most relevant reminder came from the Garvey Glen Maitland site. Next slide. And this is a graph of total phosphorus concentrations over time. And this is a corn, soybean, wheat rotation, and manure is applied after the wheat. It's had 2 full crop rotations monitored and 2 manure applications. So this graph shows that total phosphorus concentrations over time, with 500 gallons of swine manure added in November of 2017 in the green circle, and in following on August 2019. With a wet time that the manure was applied in the 2017 instance, and when the soil is wet, the water is moving, and if the water is moving, then the nutrients are going to be moving as well. Donna's now going to speak about a new site in the Lower Thames, where her team is planning to measure the role of organic amendments on soil, water, and yield outcomes.
Thanks, Mary and Tatiana. So today I will be talking about some of the LTVCA BMP verification sites to touch on some of the trade-offs we learned from the previous round of on-farms and this new site that we have. So I will start by introducing the Fairview site, which will be incorporated in this round of on-farm. The producer at this site has a hog farm operation and farms grain crops such as white beans. Swine manure is applied at this site. So during this next round of on-farm, we have the opportunity to evaluate how those organic amendments could be affecting soil health and water quality. We can apply the lessons learned from that last round of on-farm, such as the importance of timing with applying that manure, and take those lessons and work and build on those. So we know that organic amendments are a win for organic matter, but the trade-off piece for that, specifically with the Conservation Authority, is the water quality aspect. So tweaking these systems is not easy, and we know that trends with runoff and the predictability of runoff is not possible, but maybe moving those fall applications to a little bit earlier is one of those keys. Ultimately, we have to work with the producer and their land management practices, and hopefully we can gain an understanding on how we can work to reduce those nutrient losses. So next slide. Our other BMP verification sites are located in the Jeanette's Creek, which is one of the tributaries of the Thames River. This is a paired trial site, so we can continue to look at the comparisons between the two fields. In this area, it's flat clay plains, and the two fields both have Brookston clay soils, which is a very heavy soil, which is kind of unique characteristics and is interesting to us. So to give a little history about these two sites that we're monitoring, one of the sites is a no-till continuous cover crop system with a corn, soy, wheat rotation. This producer plants a cereal rye cover crop and a multi-species cover after winter wheat. The second site that we're looking at is a conservation tillage system with a corn, soy, wheat rotation as well. He does use red clover after winter wheat with a fall termination. So these sites, we have a lot of historical data about. They've been studied since 2017. And former LTVCA staff members such as Ryan Carlo worked with Dr. Mary McRae and her team at the University of Waterloo. And they've done amazing data analysis work for this site. So during the first 4 years of OnFarm, it was found that at the conservation tillage site had consistently higher TSS, TP, and nitrate loads, with TSS and TP concentrations being significantly greater at that conservation tillage site. This is something that we might expect with more tillage and less cover crop. And at the no-till site, one thing that we noticed was during the 2018-2019 year, the DRP loads were significantly higher. So today I'm going to speak a little bit more about those fertilizer application trade-offs. Sorry, Tatiana, if you can go back to that last slide. Perfect, thank you. So what we're looking at in this chart is the type of phosphorus we're losing. So it's showing the total phosphorus losses over each water year. And within each bar, it's breaking down those types. So the orange bar is the particulate P, the red is the dissolved reactive phosphorus, and the teal is the unreactive phosphorus. So you can see at both sites, the TP is primarily in that particulate form. With the conservation tillage site, you can notice that the particulate loads are higher. And this can be linked to the tillage practices, which are moving those particulates into the tiles quicker. And these results are interesting to us because it can kind of validate those benefits of the no-till and the cover crops. But the interesting thing that comes into play here with the trade-off stories is, again, in that 2018-2019 year. So next slide, please. So with this graph, what you're seeing is the cumulative event losses. That top chart is the cumulative flow. And in the charts below, for each time that we had a flow event, we can look at the cumulative load as it increases over time for all the different parameters that we're monitoring. So the dots represent the management practices at the field. That blue line is the conservation tillage field, and the pink is the no-till cover crop field. The black dots represent the tillage practices, and the blue dots represent the fertility applications. So when you're seeing that blue and black dot, it signifies that the farmer surface broadcast the fertilizer and then incorporated it, which was a common practice at the conservation tillage site. Where at the no-till conservation, at the no-till cover crop site, the farmer surface broadcasts his MAP. So overall, the TSS and the total phosphorus kind of steadily increase over time. But it's that second graph there where you can see that significant jump in the DRP for the no-till cover crop site. So what happened there was the farmer surface broadcast his map pre-planting of winter wheat in the fall of October, and then had multiple rain events right after. So that map was sitting on the soil, then we had the rain events, and then it all moves into the tile, which we're monitoring and collecting. Where at the conservation tillage site, it was surface broadcast and then incorporated. So we don't see that same jump and that same response. So one thing that we have learned from that first round of on-farm is incorporating the phosphorus and getting that phosphorus into the soils is really effective at mitigating those losses of DRP. The trade-off here is that over time, there's still going to be concerns in every other category. So with that conservation tillage site, there's still the higher TP losses, higher TSS, and higher nitrate loads. So although incorporating the fertilizer with the tillage does mitigate the loss of DRP, over time, tillage may lead to other factors. So we can move to the next slide. So with these sites, we have learned that there's opportunity to improve both systems. I would say that both systems can benefit from those 4R practices. Both of these farmers are applying their fertilizer in the fall. So if there's a way to change that timing a little bit, it might make a difference. I know personally that the farmer who applied that map and had that surface broadcast event does his very best to enhance his water quality and soil health. And it was just unfortunate that those rain events happened right after that. So maybe finding a feasible way to get that map into the soil could could mitigate those losses in the future. Next slide. So the next step with continuing these long-term data sets and looking at things from the edge of field is going to be extremely valuable to us at the conservation authorities, to helping us continue that story of understanding all these different trade-offs. Mary said something yesterday that kind of pieced everything together, which was perspective, patience, and people. So from the perspective point, we are aware of the concerns of the water quality piece, but we are also looking at things from the people perspective. And in this case, that's those producers that we work with. These amazing farmers are great to let us do this kind of research. And from their perspective, it's usually the yields and the soil health pieces that they're concerned about. But the fact that they're allowing us to analyze that water quality piece is really important to paint that whole picture of what's going on. And from this work, we can continue to work with farmers to identify and validate feasible BMP solutions. And finally, that patience piece. So we understand we need to manage our expectations, and we are all aware that building that data set requires a lot of time, and that will help us to understand what is working and how it's working. And in the environment, that takes many years. So we are really grateful to OnFarm and our cooperators for giving us that opportunity and that commitment. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Donna, Mary, and Tatiana. I appreciate how you underscored there at the end, Donna, about the importance of perspective, patience, and people in discussions of on-farm and edge of field site research. Definitely important to keep those three factors in mind with the work that we do. Your presentation also reinforces the importance of long-term research, recognizing, of course, that it will take time to see those changes, and the importance of recognizing potential trade-offs with the different management practices. Now we have an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into the topics introduced by Dr. Riki, as well as the Conservation Authority representatives. I see we've had some great conversations going in the chat, and I'll get things rolling with a question for the conservation authorities. I think that the participant here is interested in learning a little bit more about the cover cropping BMP work that you're doing. So are you looking at both fall desiccated cover crops and no cover crops? And how do you see that affecting the runoff analysis?
So I guess I'll take a stab at that to start off. So the question is, so that I'm understanding it correctly, are we looking ever at an opportunity where the cover crop is killed in the fall? And then, oh, I think that's yours, Tatiana, with your site there where it kind of looked like it had dried off, maybe a bit of winter kill. Now that I think about that a bit better.
Yeah, this is the first year we had oats this year, but every other year previously has been either cereal rye or winter wheat, where cereal rye couldn't be sourced. So we've had an overwintering cover crop for most of the years. This will be the first year where we have an oat cover crop, and they did leave it to winter kill.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And another question here for the conservation authorities. I know there's a limitation in resources in terms of what everyone is able to tackle, but we'd be curious if you could add another BMP to the trials to test, what would it be and why?
I guess I'll take a stab at that. I think what we're trying to do is this stacked approach to best management practices. And so adding that on would be really important. It may be very difficult to tease out each of those things because there's so many interactions happening. But I think with a lot of best management practices, it's you know, there may be trade-offs or there may be things that we didn't expect. So just having that full suite of things that we can look at from an indicator perspective is important. And I also think that it does take some skills to look at the different indicators that we are collecting in relation to the number of different practices that are happening across the broader area. So it's more, maybe it's more a question of just more time for, or more support, or yeah, in the end, in the data analysis piece to tease apart some of these interconnecting practices and results. I think I'll leave it there. I don't know if that, I hope that made sense to folks, but certainly more time on the analysis piece would be probably helpful.
Yeah, great to hear that perspective, Marie, and important too about the continuance of ONFARM so that we can continue to really dig into the research here. Now, I'd like to pull in a question for Dr. Riki. Why is it important to create and provide access to tools that farmers can use to investigate their soil health? And what should farmers be keeping in mind when they're testing out these tools?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to keep track, you know, of what you're doing and when you're doing it. So as far as thinking about, you know, timing, I would say, first of all, think about what works for you, right? You know, and when you're going to get the best information from the test. So two kind of sampling windows that we kind of recommend are that kind of pre-plant window. And then honestly, probably about a couple months after any spring management activities. And then post-harvest after things have kind of calmed down is that kind of second window. But thinking so not only temporally, but in relation to management practices, I think very important. And as far as getting tools out there, that's, you know, one of our goals at SHI is to create and spread tools that don't require necessarily a laboratory analysis, right? You know, so the time and the money that it takes to ship samples. There's a lot of promising work going on as far as in-field measurement of carbon concentrations. So that's another really cool area of work that's going on. So stay tuned with that. But I think, you know, the more hands that we can get these measurements into, the better, right? You know, the more data we can collect, citizen scientists. We're working at SHI in the future to kind of in the next version of the app that we release to create kind of like an online portal to where you could go in and kind of compare your slake's aggregate stability results to other folks in your region to get a better sense of, you know, what you're doing, the management practices you're, participating in now, what other people are doing, and, what works, right? I think we heard earlier today that it's really important to understand what works for, each operation. So yeah, that would be the advice that I would give, I guess. Importance.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Ricky. And I would underscore too, it really stuck out to me in your presentation, how you focused on such practical and tangible things that everybody has in their home to help them with the work, right? When you were talking about the can of soup or the jar of peanut butter or the Tupperware container. So really great that you're focusing on those practical tools that everyone has. With that, we'll ask one last question before we head into the break. So which BMP that you have tested, which BMP have you tested that has the biggest positive impact on water quality? So over to CAs, if you'd like to weigh in, knowing of course that we've had some really great discussions about the various potential trade-offs with the different BMPs that we've been chatting about.
I think that's what we're still trying to figure out.
Okay. Anyone else from CAs want to weigh in?
It's a systems approach, right? So I don't know that it's going to be as easy to pick one as it's going to be to understand the system and understanding, those different trade-offs. I certainly could. It's been easiest or not easiest of the management BMPs. There's a lot of structural BMPs that we've actually measured, and they're pretty significant. The results are sort of easy to see as well. But this vegetative cover, where we're able to see some changes over time with that. And if you think about that across a landscape, that will surely have some impact at bigger scales as well.
Great, Mary. Thanks so much for that context and reinforcing the importance of the systems approach, right? And that goes hand in hand with that importance of that long-term research to really be able to dig into the intricacies involved with the systems approach. With that, I'll take this final opportunity to thank our four speakers in this panel. So Mary, Tatiana, Donna, and Dr. Ricky, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Certainly learned a lot through your presentations and the discussion that we had. And with that, we'll now head into a short bio break. Please feel free to simply ensure that your sound and your video are off before you step away from the forum. And we'll see everyone back here by 10:40 a.m. So see you all soon. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had a chance to refill your coffee cups or your water glasses. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator for our next session. Norm Lamont and his family manage a 500-acre cash crop farm in Peterborough County. Norm is also an on-farm cooperator. Welcome, Norm. I'll hand the mic over to you.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm happy to have a great panel of experts with us here today. As you all know, climate has an effect on how we grow our crops as producers, and no one will argue that water plays an integral role with that. I know here on our farm for 4 of the last 7 years, we've seen what I would consider to be drought conditions. So I'm personally really excited to hear what our experts have to share with us today. With us on our panel, we have Danielle Sorette, who's a land resource specialist with OMAFRA. We also have Ted Taylor, who's a pedologist with the Soil Resource Group. We also have Kevin McCaig, who's the water quality manager with OMAFRA. And we also have Marty Vermey, who's the senior agronomist with the Grain Farmer of Ontario. Dan, I'm going to start our discussion here with you. Can you get us started by introducing how water and soil interact with one another?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. Can we advance the slide? Perfect. So we thought that we would just review some basics about soils and the composition of soil and how water interacts with soil. And so one of the really basic concepts is that soils are actually 50% void space on average, right? So 50%, so 25% of that is can have water in it, 25% is gas, and then 50% is solid. What we don't see on this graph is soil organic matter. And so soil organic matter makes up a portion of that solid phase of the soil as well. So if we can go to the next, don't worry, there's only 2 slides. So we just wanted to review some of the concepts around soil water and soil water characteristics. And so this plot is really kind of a nice summary. You can see across the top, there's those three diagrams of kind of soil particles. And we can see soil water at saturation, at field capacity, and at wilting point. And what you can see there, of course, is that, as you get closer to saturation, there is more water. There's a couple of kind of critical points along this graph. One of them is field capacity, and the other one is permanent wilting point. And so basically at permanent wilting point or around permanent wilting point is generally where plant roots can no longer access soil water. So at that point, the water is held too tightly to the soil particles and roots can't access it and plants start to wilt. In terms of, and then you have field capacity. So field capacity, essentially, I usually, describe that as once the soil has been saturated, if you let it drain for about 24 to 48 hours, that's about field capacity. The distance between field capacity and permanent wilting point in terms of is the available water holding capacity. And so that range is really, really important in terms of dictating how much water a soil can hold and make available for plants and how long that reserve will last.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. And can you tell us a little bit about how the different management practices change those soil properties? So from a farmer perspective?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things is that the permanent wilting point water is associated with fairly fine soil pores, and it's held very, very tightly. It's a metric that's, I guess, harder to change with management. The one that we could possibly change with management is field capacity. And so field capacity can be increased by increasing the macro porosity of the soil. We know that if we increase organic matter, we increase the porosity of our soil, which means that there's more room to hold water in that soil. And so from a management perspective, when it relates to soil water, what's interesting is, can we move that field capacity measure? Can we move that amount of water further up the scale or further to the right, farther away from permanent wilting point, so that we have a bigger, I guess, sponge that can hold water for the crops?
Great. So we know that higher organic matter gives us a little bit more water retention capacity. What about different tillage practices? Are there differences there over longer periods of time?
Well, I mean, I think generally when I think about tillage, I think about its effect on soil structure, right? And so the more we can protect soil structure, and we heard earlier today about aggregate stability as it relates to soil health. And so really, I mean, the less tillage, the more opportunity there is for a soil to form water stable aggregates, which then also allows the soil to hold more water because it's increasing the porosity of that soil.
That's great. Thanks so much, Dan. I'm going to pass it over to Ted now. Ted, you've spent a lot of time in the field and underground in the trenches. Can you briefly explain to us some of the influence of site differences and degradation in measuring soil health indicators and the productivity with respect to water availability around that?
Certainly. I'll start off with talking about how soil water manifests itself across the landscape, and then jump to soil degradation types and the impacts on available water. So you probably know that most of the on-farm field sites were laid out to try and encompass slope positions of upper, middle, and lower, which generally follows moisture patterns of drier conditions to wetter conditions on average. It also follows a depth to water table, which gets shallower as you move down slope. Generally, the productivity followed the available soil moisture, in as much as being drier at the upper slope positions, you also had lower available water and lower yields. Conversely, at the bottom of the slope, you had higher moisture conditions, a higher water table, but not always had a higher available moisture, because in some cases it was so saturated that the roots weren't accessing where the available water was. Invariably, it seemed year to year, it's the mid to lower slope positions that had that balance between water table fluctuation, available water, and generally had the higher yields. On dry years, it was worse on the upper slope positions. On wetter years, the yields and the available water was, for different reasons, less so on the lower slope positions. And that's the general trend. And in terms of degradation, the general trend, this is not always 100% right, we were finding and expecting to find more tillage erosion degradation issues on upper slope positions, some evidence of water erosion on the mid-slope positions, and in the lower slope positions, being higher moisture content, generally speaking, we're at a slightly greater risk for compaction. And that's generally what we have found so far. In terms of what soil degradation does in terms of available soil water, some of the features we were looking at, such as loss of organic matter and any kind of surface structure deterioration. Yes, by losing organic matter, you're losing the availability, the capacity for holding onto available water, but also it's affecting infiltration rates. Less water is getting into the system, and there's less general water in the topsoil on those type of sites. Any type of compaction, whether it's surface compaction, tillage-based plow pans, or subsurface compaction related to axle weight, the overall trend is that you're losing porosity. Yes, it's mostly macropores, but you're losing some of those middle size or mesopores, and that's where a lot of the available moisture is. So compaction generally can reduce, it's a generalization, generally can reduce available water. Soil loss is another one. What you're doing with tillage, erosion, water, wind erosion, is you're losing a lot of the soil part, the top part of the soil, 3 or 4 layers in some cases, up to 2 feet, with the case of tillage erosion, that have inherently the higher water holding capacity. And you're exposing whatever that parent material, the deepest layers, down 2 feet in some cases, you're exposing that material, which has not been weathered, has not been changed over time by centuries, if not millennia of plant growth, to be a much better medium for water holding capacity and root growth. Focusing on tillage erosion, with tillage, the passes, you're removing the upper layers of the soil on the knoll or crest slope positions, and you're exposing the materials below. On one site, the Woodrill site, for the on-farm program, we expose sand and gravels, coarser sands, a lot of high stone content. And what happened was that you were dealing with soils at a very high infiltration rate, a very high, what they call hydraulic conductivity, less water in those soils, very, very little water holding capacity. Contrast that with Nick Stockman's site, and you took away the silt loam and silty loam caps on these tillage erosion sites and exposed clay or silty clay material that was already very tight to begin with, and with traffic became even more compacted. And these sites, very little water infiltrated, and runoff seemed to be a bigger problem, which Kevin's going to refer to runoff in a general momentarily. So what are some of the indicators of these tillage erosion sites? We've all seen them. You drive by right around planting season or late in the fall, if someone's done primary tillage, and you see those white caps. You see a higher concentration of stones on these shoulder slope positions, and in many cases, very little topsoil. In terms of plant indicators, you can get a fair bit of a reasonable germination rate and emergence rate because of moisture content early in the growing season. But as the season progresses, if you go through the field and look at corn, for example, in that July-August window, you often see on these particular microsites stunted corn, discolored corn, and by the time you get to yield, and we were seeing this in hand yield, we got substantially lower yields on these type of sites, mostly because of an extreme moisture deficit on those particular sites. And for example, at this Woodrill site in 2022, our corn yield was only 13% of the field average. So it's nearly a 90% loss in yield. On a Nick Stockman's, similar situation, except instead of being gravel exposed, as we said, it's clay with that lower water holding capacity. For example, in 2020, the winter wheat yield was about 45 to 50% of the field average. generally speaking, wrap up and say severe degradation could substantially reduce available water.
That's great. Thanks so much for that, Ted. And I do have a follow-up question if we have time for it at the end. And for those that are listening in, if you do want to put your questions in the chat, there is some time at the end of our discussion here for some Q&A, and I'll refer back to those questions in the chat room for that. So moving on now to Kevin, who's the water quality engineer with OMAFRA. Can you share some insights into how changing farming practices has affected water runoff in your experience? Well, you just have to take yourself off of mute there, Kevin.
That's the first step. So yeah, I guess I'm thinking of the long term here, but I mean, we've moved with, we get larger equipment, we've got bigger fields, and we have less permanent cover. I think everybody would agree that over a number of years here. And so that all contributes to that changing the effect on water runoff. I mean, the larger equipment, you got a higher risk of compaction and making, those getting smaller pores, things like that. We have the bigger fields. When the water does start moving, it's got more momentum now. There's nothing to sort of slow it down, so to speak, along the way. And then with the less permanent cover, less roots, less so that microbial and biological activity, and just things that sort of, little dams that stop it on the way, sort of thing, are probably the three big things I see. But over time, and a lot of them, they're for various economic reasons, but that's probably what's one reason why we're seeing that even more than perhaps more rain or more intense rains. It's the runoff there's a distinction between rain and runoff. I mean, you can have a lot of rain, and if it infiltrates, then the runoff's taken care of. But so that's what we want to try to encourage.
And what are some of the easiest things that producers can do to increase that infiltration and retain the water in the soils during the growing season at the various stages?
I mean, I think that compaction is probably the biggest culprit in terms of, it's pretty obvious when if the water has to get into the soil. Yeah, that interaction between the ground surface and right there is kind of a key point. What's how do we slow the water to give it time to get into the ground, or alternatively, is there enough aggregate and aggregation at that surface to do that? Yeah, tillage to some extent does help that for a very short while, but then it's just, it seals off, and then it's not there in the long term. And so what can you do to improve infiltration is generally, and that's more of that organic matter and things like that, adding to that surface texture and residue and covers to kind of slow the water, just give it a chance to get in if there is an intense rain. So.
Do any of the sites that you're looking at have sort of field edge buffers where you prevent some of that runoff that you've noticed have made a significant change?
The field buffers, you're saying, like at the edge of the field?
Edge of the field strips that just prevent some of that erosion from making it into the ditches and waterways.
Yeah, certainly. I call that kind of the last ditch effort, but it's kind of the it's nicer to leave that water right where it lands, right? Because we're trying to water the whole field, and when you start having runoff, it's not helping those other areas. But they will, do the things like clean out some of that sediment. And that as it's coming through, that's the particulate phosphorus. It might not do as good a job on that dissolved phosphorus as Donna showed there at other times. And then also if that water is going through the tile drains, it's kind of bypassing those buffers. And we find like 65 to 85 in the previous on-farm studies, the water that's leaving the edge of the field is going through the tiles on those systematically tile drained fields. 65 to 80% of the water. That's a lot of water. That's like, 10 inches or so of rain or of water that's going. 25% probably of the precipitation.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Kevin. And I know on our farm and our on-farm plots, I mean, we live in the rolling hills of Cavan and Peterborough County, and we have severe slope, tremendous risk of erosion. And since we've started instituting some of those BMPs, things like cover cropping and minimum tillage, the rotations and having the cereals in the crop has certainly helped with our water infiltration. And we're seeing significantly less soil moving across our field. So we've certainly learned from this experience through the on-farm trials. And those BMPs are making a difference in that perspective as well. Great. So moving along, we have Marty here with us as well, and he's from the GFO. And Marty, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network is all about?
Sure. Thanks, Norm. Yeah, it's the YEN that a lot of people refer to, the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network, is really a partnership of multiple disciplinary people working together. So from researchers, extension staff, and also the grain organizations, both in Ontario and Michigan. So Michigan State University extension staff and researchers, as well as the Michigan Wheat program, which is made up of the wheat farmers with their checkoff fees. They have a research program just like GFO, and they are helping to support the project, as well as GFO in Ontario. The farmers are really supporting it. The board of directors, as well as Joanna Fallings in Ontario as the extension specialist, really critical to this project to help it work in the field, but also the expertise of researchers, Dave Hooker and the Josh Nizowski helping with their modeling. So the Great Lakes Yield Enhancement Network is taken from a concept from ADAS from the UK that they started back in 2012, but we adapted it for Ontario and Michigan and the Great Lakes region. And it's really been fortunate for us to work with the farmers in this area that are really excited about learning more about wheat and understanding what makes up their yields. So that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to figure out the yield components and what's the difference between high yielding and low yielding, or even better yet is the efficiency, so that we actually measure what the farmer's potential yield can be through crop modeling. And that crop modeling also entails using the SPA model, which gives a rough estimation of water use availability in the soil based on the soil type and the organic matter. So really interesting work that we're doing, and it wouldn't be without sponsors and the farmers to make this happen. Last year we had 96 farmers in Ontario and 62 in the US, and this year we've already signed up about 100 farmers in Ontario and about 90 in the US, and we still have a little bit of room this week. Applications closed down, but we'll put a link in here if anybody's interested.
That's great, Marty. I'm certainly familiar with the YEN program. We were fortunate enough to be a participant in the early pilot project and have continued throughout the duration. And it's been a great learning experience for us. The reports that we receive as growers in terms of how the different management strategies across the province and in Michigan affect how we grow that crop have been significant. Marty, what has that project revealed in terms of unlocking the potential of fields through water management using wheat or a third crop in the rotation?
Yeah, we took a look at the top 20, the bottom 20 of the producers. And just to give you a little bit of background, this past year, the yields ranged from 55.9 bushels per acre to 173.4. And the yield potential that we calculated on these fields ranged from 98 to 230. So a wide range, a lot of different soil types. So we could really tease out what's kind of going on. And what I found is, my first thought was, oh yeah, the high yielding, they're probably using organic amendments. They probably have high organic matter. It's a certain soil type. But it wasn't quite like that. It actually turned out to be the same organic matter. The high yielding fields and the lower yielding fields, they were 3.2% organic matter. So that really surprised me. But what I did find out is that the soil types were different. The higher yielding environments had more loam content. The lower yielding environments were more sand and clay as far as the percentages. And these are averaged together, the bottom 20 and the top 20. I did notice some differences in the nutrient levels, as well as the amount applied. So there were some neat things that we found out. But one of the key things was water holding capacity, and water holding capacity was lower on the lower yielding. The higher yielding fields had better water holding capacity. Part of that is probably soil type, but it's also management. And we're finding, same with ADAS in the UK, have found out that 25% of the yield component that's making it up is farm management. So how they manage the soils. Didn't find it in the data because it didn't dig deep enough last night with the analysis I had, but one thing we found over the past 3 years that we've been doing this project is that the high yielding farmers have cover crops in the rotation. So we need to dig in a lot deeper on that and what are they using and how often. We don't have that right now, but we do know that the high yielding farms are using cover crops.
And another BMP to have that cereal in the rotation gives you that opportunity to put some cover crops as well. So toodles to you there. Daniel just lifted his hand there. Did he have a question?
I was just going to add that when we look at available water holding capacity of soil, something that corroborates what Marty just said is that the medium textured soils are kind of that sweet spot in terms of available water holding capacity. And so those medium textured soils just have a natural advantage over some of the other textures. And if you look at water retention in soils, those middle textured soils kind of they are able to hold more water than clays and more water than sands. And so it's also, some of it is also luck of the draw.
Yeah. And one neat thing that we're also seeing too is that management are changing. Farmers are understanding what their potential is and that they can actually achieve more. And in some of those tougher soils, they're finding ways of how to increase or improve that water holding capacity through different management.
That's great. Thanks so much, Marty. And that really leads us into some of the questions that have been coming in here through the chat. And I have one question for all of you. If there was one piece of advice that you can give to farmers to increase the resilience on their farms in terms of water retention and water holding capacity, what would that be? Knowing full well that there's no silver bullet in agriculture.
Ted here. One of the BMPs we talked about in terms of soil health with the ministry, Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food Rural Affairs soil health team about 5 years ago was one of the most important things you can do for water holding capacity is to build your soil. And the best way to do that, and we're talking mostly topsoil, and that's only part of the equation, but it's an important one, is to keep adding organic amendments and use cover crops and any kind of crop rotation that diversifies the soil biota or the ecosystem for microbes. Anything that you do of that nature, where you're building the capacity of the soil, it still speaks to step one. When you look at Don Lobb's model for adopting no-till, is get your soils in shape. If you get your soils in shape, the porosity increases, as Dan was saying, the structure improves, and you're going to have a higher water holding capacity in the topsoil and over time in the layers below that as well. Build it.
Norm, as far as silver bullets, we've been kind of looking for silver bullets in the Yen project, and what we found is it's not one thing. Not one thing is attributing to higher yields or higher percentage efficiency. It's really doing everything timely and timing your applications and working it smartly and doing it effectively. Yeah. It helps when you get timely rains too. And not heavy rains, but timely rains.
Yeah, it really is a systems approach to it. Kevin or Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to echo. I was actually going to say that it's really a systems approach. There are so many things that can affect available water holding capacity, and I think we in terms of we all want to improve soil health and make things better. We also have to have that lens that it has to work within an agricultural system, and so there's a lot of little pieces that you can tweak to potentially increase soil health and increase the water that your soil can hold. And I mean, those things are related to crop rotation, to tillage, etc. Dealing with potential problems with compaction. We haven't really talked too much about compaction, but that has a huge influence on soil water movement and holding capacity. So.
Yeah. And I just echo the same. It's there. I don't think there is a one solution thing. It's a systems approach, and if there was one, we'd probably have found it by now. So yeah, that's it's a complicated little system.
That's great. Thanks, everyone. And I'll just roll in a theme that I've been seeing in the chat here. So first of all, there's some information about the YEN program in the chat as well, if anyone's interested in participating in that program. And a couple of comments about moving topsoil and taking topsoil, scraping it out of the valleys and bringing it up to the peaks of the slopes. Is that a realistic approach, or should we be focusing on other BMPs with respect to that? That's for everyone.
I've been involved in a couple of those projects, largely with Adam Hayes and Doug Aspinall. And if you've got the right soil conditions, if you have the moved soil downslope, you carefully map out the eroded area, you carefully map out the resource that's at the bottom of the slope. In some cases, we're seeing 2.5 feet of topsoil in a lower level area. If you do it when conditions are dry, and everything is well measured and well mapped out, and you also use a suite of BMPs to protect it, so you don't all of a sudden go back to tillage, a full tillage system. Hopefully you're in a no-till system already, or at least a reduced till system. And again, build it up with manure and cover crops, rotation, and cover it with residue and any other kind of cover crop, and do it. Keep the soil in place. It can work. Does it actually pay? Some don't necessarily think so. So one example we've seen from one of our cooperators is that they have very intensely eroded microzones on their field, on these no slope positions, and it's woodrow. And they've elected to say, okay, we're going to accept that 4 or 5% of our field is in this condition. And what we're going to do is change our expectations and change our management. So we're going to keep moving on our BMPs, and they are increasing organic matter across the entire field. But what they're doing is reducing seeding rates and reducing inputs on these sites, knowing full well they're not going to get the yield return. And they might, in the lower areas where the higher water holding capacity is, increase the seeding rate in some cases, increase fertility application, so they can get the better yields. They can maximize the better yields on those prime sites in lower areas that have the capacity. There's a whole rift of them. And if you want to bug anybody, bug Adam Hayes. He wrote a couple of fact sheets on the whole thing. So at any rate, that would be my response.
That's great. Thanks, Ted. And we'll wrap it up there just because we're getting close on time. There's a couple more questions in the chat regarding the yen and a question regarding controlled drainage. If either of you would like to answer those, that would be great. But I'll pass it back to Andrea now. And thanks so much to all of our experts on this panel for sharing their experiences and knowledge. And we'll look forward to the rest of this seminar.
Thanks so much, Norm, and to all of our panelists for a great discussion. The topic, of course, is such an important one, given our shifting precipitation patterns, including some significant rainfall events, and the longer stretches of time that we're experiencing in the summer without rain. For our final session today, I'd like to introduce Dr. Adrian Correndo. He is an assistant professor and the research chair for the Pick Family Chair in Sustainable Cropping Systems in the Department of Plant Agriculture at the University of Guelph. Dr. Correndo will be discussing practical tools to share agricultural research data and results. And as Dr. Correndo is speaking this morning, I encourage you to post your questions and comments in the chat, again, keeping that conversation flowing there. We'll dig into as many of the questions as we can after he wraps up his presentation. So welcome to Dr. Correndo, over to you.
Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being in this great meeting and loving the discussions that you're having. I'm really eager to start interacting more with the community and having great discussions. So the topic that I've been invited to speak about is some work that I've been performing during the last years, working at Kansas State University, and also bringing these ideas of having more interactive dashboards being used for sharing results as well as data for agricultural research. I think I have the control right now. I'm trying to, yeah, there you go. So this invited us to think about what we are doing now and how we are facing the challenges of the future. So it's not any news that agriculture is more and more a data-driven business, a data-driven industry, and the producers have this need of adopting more technology, as much technology as they can. But at the same time, we are facing challenges. I will say, from my perspective, that collection nowadays, it doesn't seem the big issue, collecting the data, but main issues are related to processing the data and sharing the data with some level of standards. So challenges that we have currently related to this, I'm trying to, there you go. It's number one, I would say, is education, because for developing all the dashboards that we've been showing and talking about, which we are just in the learning curve, right? We are getting started. During the last couple of years, we have great developments from both more computing capacity, but also applied programming that we can use to have this applied data science that we need in every research field, and agriculture is no exception, of course. This brings us the second challenge, that is about reproducibility, because in many areas of research, and again, agriculture is not an exception, we have a limited capability to reproduce analysis and the results. Because number one, data is rarely shared, and codes, well, how we analyze the data even less. And last but not least, we have this challenge about accessibility, because yet we are not translated, at least not enough, the science that we are working into flexible decision tools. So this is the challenge that I personally see, that some of these interactive dashboards may help us to address this challenge, particularly accessibility of data and results. So, and this is all about, from my perspective, to add more value to agricultural research that we are generating. Nowadays, the common pathway that we have is that farmers will have needs to address, issues to address. They will contribute with taxes as well, and eventually with some data. And in the middle, we will have universities and institutions like OMAFRA or government that will help us to conduct research, taking these needs, resources like coming from taxes and data, either from farmers or generate data on research stations, let's say. And with that, we generate information, and the streamline is conducting many times just to scientific articles. I'm not saying that it's exclusively going to this, but we have a bias that all the research is ending on scientific articles, and many times is the way that they are coming back to producers is limited. And it's limited in the sense that most of the deliverables or the material that we are sharing nowadays, they are coming on printed material. It could be an online document and presentations. This, I would say, there are the three main resources sharing back through extension programs with farmers. And eventually we have some interactive tools, but most of the tools that we have, they are Excel spreadsheet with some macros. We'll talk a little more about later. And here's where I personally see that tools like these shiny apps will give more details in a second, that will really help to enhance the value of all the information that we are generating to enforce the extension and educational programs. And the main thing is that there is life beyond the paper, right? So we should be able to take information from the paper and taking advantage of all the rigorous analysis that we may conduct, and somehow bring it back to farmers in an interactive way that they can explore with flexibility. So talking about the Excel tools and common tools that we used to have around, and mainly work with some macros, that they are really useful, but at the same time, they are very limited in the sense that we may have either hardware requirements or software compatibility issues. Excel is good, but we have a lack of reproducibility to trace the different steps that we are doing. Let's say when we are doing a filter, or we are transposing one column to rows, or actions like that, where we cannot come back, or we won't remember what we did when we are working on an Excel file. So sometimes it's easy to corrupt the Excel files that we are working with these type of tools. And of course, they are limited in the sense that they cannot process maps or images as many of the data nowadays for farmers, let's say within monitor, are coming in that type of format. So, and here these interactive dashboards may help us to give a lot of values, replacing this status quo of using the spreadsheets, and give more possibilities to stakeholders to explore the data and generate products with flexibility. So in my opinion, they will be really useful tools to enhance the knowledge mobilization programs, and as well as educational resources. So what is Shiny? So Shiny is a framework to build interactive web applications. It has been developed by a company that nowadays is called as POSIT. It used to have the name of RStudio, which is a company that mainly helps with the side of the data analysis using R software, which is an open source an open source software to run data analysis and do many other stuff. So how Shiny works? Of course, we'll have the user interface components, but in the background, we'll have a server running all the code that we need to produce the outcomes. So basically, the user it will face this interface, and the user will be able to make some choices, or either to introduce some data as inputs. Based on those decisions, they will get some outputs that they can come in different formats, like PDF reports, tables, plots, images, maps, different type of files. The possibilities are really endless here. But in the background, what we have is some we have a server that is running. Depending on the actions that the user is choosing, it will run some code that is particularly featured because it's running code using open source software like R or Python most recently. So it will help us to connect what researchers are doing nowadays, working with these open source softwares, and connect that with a tool that farmers or stakeholders in general can use. So now we will see some examples of these different tools that I've been working with, and with some of them, and some others I think that they are great examples because they are sharing on-farm trials data. So let's start with a tool that we've been working with Iowa soybeans while I was at Kansas State University. So this is an app that we published a paper, I think last year or 1.5 years ago with people from Iowa soybeans and Dr. Ciampiri, the leader of the team I was working at Kansas State. Oh, I went back. Oh, sorry. So if you want to explore, this is the paper, and if you are more than welcome to try with this QR code or this short link to see how the application works. But basically, the idea of this is to help farmers to process some yield monitor data that we may have from last couple of years, and try to use that data to give some recommendations in terms of seeding rate in soybeans, to help farmers if they want to implement variable rate seeding for the first time. So this is a screenshot of the app, how it looks like, the dashboard. So basically we'll have a left panel where the user will make all the decisions, and it will upload the data that they have in a compressed format, uploading the yield maps. Then we'll make some decisions, and the app will process those yield maps to identify different yield zones. So what the app is doing, based on the user inputs, like the data of the yield map of previous years, and then some decisions like which is the aggregation method for the data that the farmer wants to use, which is the current seeding uniform rate that the farmer uses as a default, and informations as, I'm sorry, it's I'm not touching the screen. And then based on these 4 or 5 different decisions that the user will do, the app will process the maps. It will identify different zones. There are some advanced options in this case, but it will help to pre-process the map, identify ill zones, basically. So later on, the user may have 2 options mainly in this case. It will decide if the aggregated data will be based only on the ill level. So the app will classify that based on the distribution of ill in low, medium, or high, a high ill level with this red, yellow, and green colors, and it will produce some analysis or results like the plots that we see here with the distribution of yields, and which is the coefficient of variation of the different zones over time. And farmers may also decide to use another approach that it will also consider for the classification the yield stability, let's say. So instead of producing the different management zones just in terms of the value of yield, it may also help to process the yield stability as well. So we may have categories that low yield but stable, or low yield but unstable, and the same with high yield levels. So based on these decisions later on, the app inside on the server, it will run different models that will try to get different different variables, like the survival rate that we may have, which is the number of the proportion of the number of seeds that eventually be part of the final plant stand or the plant population of the crop. And based on that, it will try to minimize the estimated loss profit. So basically the app, depending on the decisions and the data, it will come up with a recommendation that will minimize that loss profit, either because farmers may be over applying seeds in some zones, or they are under seeding in some other places of the field. So this is one of the examples. Another example that I've been working with is yield forecast, let's say. So in this case, this is a database that I've been working during my PhD with corn trials. We gathered a database about more than 1,000 trials across the US, and as with data from Ontario and Quebec as well. So basically, we run a machine learning model here using some simple management variables, soil variables, and weather at the spring. And then with that, the app will run a machine learning model and produce a yield forecast. In this case, is the yield without any nitrogen input, like to know how is the nitrogen supply of the soil. So the app, it looks like something like this, where the user can choose different options, like which is a tillage system, if they are using no-till or conventional tillage, which is the soil texture, a topsoil, which is the level of soil organic matter, and later on, simple variables of weather, which is mean temperature and precipitation during March, April, and May. And based on these inputs, the app will run this machine learning model on the background, and it will give some estimates of which is the expected yield values depending on the previous crop. Here we have alfalfa in green, soybean as a previous crop in blue, and if it's a cereal, basically if it's corn over corn mainly, in orange colors. And with that, the app will also produce some estimated values of how many pounds that yield may represent in terms of the contribution of the soils in terms of nitrogen. So this is another example that it could be. We can put some of these machine learning models to work with very simple decisions and intuitive dashboard. Another example that I created with a research that I've been conducting for my master project in Argentina. It was related to a database with corn nitrogen response in the in the heart of the corn production area of Argentina. So this involved a review of gathering about 800 trials of nitrogen in corn. And basically with this, we run analysis where we classify all these different trials in terms of the yield potential that they have or different soil textures. So here we have in red fine textures, in blue have medium texture soil, and in yellow we have sandy soils basically. So we ran analysis, we published a paper, and about a year after that, we decided to put this application that we may see here, very similar dashboard. We have a panel here where the users will basically choose which is the yield potential, number 1, which is the soil texture, number 2, and 3, 4, and 5 is related to the nitrogen, residual nitrogen they have in the soil at planting. And then they can play with variables like the cost of nitrogen, of the price of corn, and based on that, they will produce some estimates of which is the optimal nitrogen they may be aiming as a goal. This is in Spanish, sorry, but this is it was a tool that is mainly thought for Argentinian producers. And another opportunity is that these models that we are running, if the farmers have their own data, they can just upload the data here, and the app will run the model for them, and they will give them the estimates of the optimal nitrogen if they have their own data. So that's another possibility that I wanted to add to help farmers to process the data. Let's move. And this is one example that I really love to put this tool, because it helps us to have impact with the research. And this is a screenshot of the tweet that I published in September 2022 when we launched that app. And for at least for my account, it got a lot of likes and I got a lot of retweets, which indicates that somehow users, they may find this useful. And actually, after 3 months, I decided to check on the usage of the app. And there were more than 2,000 hours of use in the first 3 months. And then if we do the math of 90 days or 100 days and 24 hours a day, this app has been used in these 3 months, which is it matches with the exactly with the planting time in corn, and the time where farmers are still making decisions in nitrogen. And it has been used 24/7. And it was a really good metric to have, because we have published the paper and then we put some summaries the year before, but certainly the paper, it wasn't having the impact that it should have, because it was really useful information, but we haven't put it in a format that it can really help farmers to use and to explore what the results were. Another example that I would like to mention is something that you may be interested, because I know that there are several on-farm trials network here, but it's another example of Iowa soybeans, where basically they create a dashboard to share on-farm trials data, and the dashboard, it looks very similar. We have a panel in the left side where we may choose a crop. They have experiments in soybean, in corn as well, and then they have different technologies that they have been tested. With that, we can explore where in the state of Iowa these trials have been conducted, which were the years involved. And basically, it works like we have the network of trials that they have been harvested with a combine, and this is going to a database that is combined later on, merged with web data and soil data. The server will process and produce some descriptive analysis, statistical models, economic results, and that is what is going to be on the dashboard that users will explore. And this is, of course, open to any type of audience: students, agronomists, researchers, etc. So the tool allows, for example, to have different outcomes like plots like this that will help to visualize the results. In this case, the difference if they were reducing the nitrogen rate in corn, Or eventually, if you want a written format, you can generate a report, just choosing the option of generating a report and making some selections on which are the variables that you are interested in, and it will generate a report as well. And besides that, these tools, they could also be useful for internal use. I mean, they could be apps that they are for the workplace, not only to share with the stakeholders. And this is an example, local one, that Michelle Edwards is currently working with Patrick Macmillan. So all the credit and kudos to Patrick for developing this, which is a platform that it will help us to get access to the data. So instead of, if I want to all the corn yield data, for, let's say from the 80s until the current years, instead of going to our folder that we have with a bunch of different Excel files and exploring one by one, this app, it will help us to take those files, process them in a server, and we will just go and make some selections, and based on those selections, we will get all the data. So this type of files, they could be really simple with not a big level of complexity, but it will have a very useful mission that it will, at least it will help internally researchers to facilitate the access to the data. And eventually, we may use the same platform to later on open it to for the general public and stakeholder as well. So to close the presentation, last 2 slides, general recommendations from my side or my experience working with these different apps. There are 4 main aspects that we may need to take care. The number one, of course, is identifying which is the need, which is the mission of the app, because that will help us to maintain it simple and try to minimize all the nice to have features that many times they could be good, but sometimes they may complicate or they may overwhelm the users when they are navigating the dashboard. Of course, internally, we need to test that. We need to run some pilot tests and trying to involve experts as well as the audience, the target audience that we have, and ask them for feedback as well to improve the design of the dashboard. Of course, we need to check accessibility, and there are tools nowadays where, for example, the Wave tool is an online tool where we just put a link of the application, and it will run some tests to give us an idea of how accessible we are, and if we need to accommodate some of the features of the application. And I will reinforce the idea on the first 2 components: identify the need and maintain it simple, because many times we have cases like this, right, where the product request, it may become really complex, but actually most of the different features that we may include in the app, it may just complicate the user experience. So as long as we are able to identify clearly which is the need that we need to solve, we can decide on a dashboard that is as simple as possible and that provide the solution that we are targeting. So that will be probably my recommendation, the most important, I think. Identify the need and trying to maintain the app as simple as possible. Many times, it's not about creating the best app ever, but it's to create an app that is useful and it solves the problem that we identify. Of course, we need to get credit for this, and there are several possibilities. If anybody is involved on developing this app, there are possibilities to publish the code, to make it accessible to others, or using platforms like GitHub. That will also allow us to use other platforms like Zenodo that will help us to generate a DOI, a digital object identifier, that will help us to get credit for the development that we made. So to close the presentation, my opinion on how do the Shiny apps may help us. Of course, This is from my side mainly focused on users. I think that will really help us to give flexibility that users nowadays need to explore the results at their own pace, because that will also help them to understand which are the sources of variation, or they may see on the database that we manage for different testing different technologies, which are the gaps, which are the places where we don't have trials yet, where we should go. And of course, sometimes they may also help to facilitate the processing or pre-processing data. And of course, it will help researchers, because we need to understand the audience when we are designing our KTT plans. The knowledge transfer plans is optimal to understand which is the target audience that we have. And of course, to learn the limitations that we have in our own data sets and the models that we are developing. And last but not least, we need to be more reproducible. We need to work more in a way that we are following good data management practices for now and for the future, because that will help us also to educate the leaders of agriculture of the future in terms of data literacy. With that, I will say thank you very much, and open to any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Dr. Correndo. I really appreciate the emphasis that you placed on finding ways to help make the scientific findings more accessible to the agricultural industry. The chat was really lighting up on that front. And it's interesting to see some of the tangible examples of the tools that you're using to help with this knowledge translation and transfer. Now we're going to delve into some of the questions from the participants, and there's been quite a few that I've been working my way through. So to get us started, participants are interested in learning a bit more about the opportunities associated with the Shiny tools. So with the tools that you've worked on, is it possible to track the number of unique users or the average time that users are spending in the app?
Yes, exactly. Yes, I tried to show one of the slides with that application, and let me show if I go back a couple.
I remember the 2,000 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm in tracking that. Yeah, there are possibilities depending on where you host the. For example, for this app, we are hiring the services of Shiny, which is the company. So we're using an AWS server. With that, they have a bunch of different stats about the usage of the app in terms of the connections that you will have, the number of hours, the memory they're using. Yeah, there is a bunch of different stats, like following the social media impact. Is very similar format. And I understand that depending on the service that you hire, I mean, you may get more detailed more detailed reports about the usage. Actually, there are options. I mean, we may have apps that they are open access, but at the same time, we may manage options like giving users a password. They may register and have a passport for having access to a specific details of the data. That's possible as well. So yeah, so that could give us attributes to different users depending on what they are looking for.
Okay. I suspect that the OSCIA team is going to be excited to follow up with you and continue the conversation on that front. The next question that I have is one that many members of the industry have been grappling with for some time, including through the chat today. So I'm curious to hear your perspective. How do we get these tools or frameworks or opportunities into the hands of new users when often we really seem to be reaching the same groups of farmers or the same groups of industry representatives with the knowledge translation transfer work that we're doing?
Yeah, that's definitely something that is happening everywhere. In my experience in Argentina, in Kansas as well, after a couple of years in the same place, you start to see the same people. So you feel that you are preaching to the congregation. I know that feeling. So definitely these type of tools, when we open them, and especially if we made the code accessible, at least the code on the design of these different tools, they will start having audience from different places that will start spreading the word. And yeah, I mean, social media help us. I mean, in this case, having the Twitter at hand and make a post about the app, it help us to reach a wider audience. But yeah, I mean, having these apps out, it doesn't mean that they are going to be used, right? Because we may create that, but of course we need to combine the development of this with a good plan on social media and having different channels to share that these apps are available. But yeah, I mean, it's also I think that as long as the tool is well developed and it helps us farmers in this case to have access to where the trials were conducted. So let's say one of my intentions during my program, we will be working in reviews, let's say with phosphorus and potassium. That's one of the projects that I have in mind, also with nitrogen. The idea is to put an app that it will show you, for example, a map of where all the trials of the database have been conducted. So the user can go and check on the map and make a click. So let me show, I think I put one at the end, that it was an example in Kansas. It's the last, yeah, I put this one in purpose. This is an example of the database that we have collected in the US. We couldn't make all the data accessible because there are some property rights that we cannot violate, of course, that we need to respect. But at least on the database in Kansas, we were able to put this simple app that shows where the different trials were across the Kansas state. So the users may come here and choose which is the counties that they want to look at the data. This is a combination of all the trials, but user can come here and select which is the trial where they are at and see. But we may see here, like we have a lot of holes in the database, so we have a lot of counties where we don't have any research on nitrogen. And that's what I was talking about, visualizing the gap. So as long as we open the game and make the data more accessible, that will help the audience. They will share the word. I think that they will spread the word if they find this useful. I think that there are tools that may help us to build trust, to be more transparent, so farmers can know and select, this is a soil type that I'm interested in, so I will explore this database to see if these soil types are if I feel or not represented with the results, right? But we need to open the game. From the research side, I really feel that we need to open the data, make it accessible, and allow farmers and stakeholders in general to explore and see where are the gaps.
Thanks for that follow-up, and it really struck me too the importance of having that ability to filter, to access that local data, or I know with on-farm access, being able to filter by the different soil types, how crucial that can be to make the information accessible and relatable for the producers. Again, through the chat, as the conversation has been continuing, someone floated out an interesting idea that I wanted to share with you to get your thoughts. So in order to help with extending that reach, might it be possible for Shiny tools to interact with other systems that farmers are already using? So I think, for example, of Climate Field View.
At least until now, I haven't worked with an example like that, but I understand that could be possible. These Shiny apps are really flexible in terms of embedding. For example, here, instead of this map, we may embed a video or something like that. So I think that it's really possible to embed another, another type of tool inside. I'm not aware about that, but having worked on the programming side of this, I think that could be possible. That could be possible. Yes, I mean the flexibility that these apps may have is impressive. It's impressive. So I'm not aware. I haven't worked with tool that it will put another app inside, but I think that it could be perfectly possible. For example, one of the things that these apps, they started only using R language. So they were R Shiny, but since last year they opened the gate to Python, which Python is another software that is very, very popular in terms of data science in general, and is way more popular than R, especially in the industry. So you can develop this app is in Python, and with Python you can do almost whatever you want. So yeah, I think that could be perfectly possible, and that's what we want to see, right? We want to see these tools to advance, right?
And that's why conversations like today are so great, right? Where we get to interact with the industry and hear some thoughts in terms of potential opportunities. I have one final question to wrap things up in terms of our time together, Dr. Correndo. You touched on the importance of really identifying the user need. And we're curious if you could share a little bit about the methods that you would use to help identify user need. So if you'd be looking to do surveys or hold focus groups or grower consultations, how do you dig into that, finding that user need?
Yeah, of course. I mean, having this, if you have partners, first is having partners involved in the project, because they may help to know the right tool to ask for feedback. But yeah, I mean, sending that to experts that will share that and make focus groups, that is a really good tool, because it will help us to identify which are the tools or the features of the app that they're really needed, to the ones that they may be nice but not really necessary for the app. So yeah, that's a good example of what they did in Iowa with the ISOFAST tool, because that is actually coming from the Iowa Soybeans Association. So there is a board that includes, of course, industry, farmers, as well. So they have decided which is which were the features that they want to keep inside. And of course, in this one, it was having economic results, right? Having economic results is crucial everywhere, but sometimes we have a lot of interactions, and this app allows to explore a lot of weather relationship of the response with different weather patterns. So we may have a lot of options here, and this is an example where they work together, the industry, Iowa State University, working together to put a tool that is useful. And it took them a couple of years to develop, but since they got the framework right, then they are developing other apps that they are having. I don't have the example here, but they have this app that is general to share all the on-farm trials. They have another app that is the variable seeding rate that I've been working with them. They have another app that it will help to manage soybean quality and to understand the variability in the field and how they can get the best segregation, and a models that will help. They are working in a model to predict soybean quality with satellite images, so it will help farmers to put the information of the field, and then with that they will make some processing with satellite data, and they will give them an estimate of which is the quality they may have across the field and identify hotspots, right, with quality. So it may help to manage the segregation of the harvest. And yeah, it's always optimal if we can ask the audience to have some feedback. Yeah, focus group I think is a great tool.
It's great to hear about some of the great collaborations that you've had already in the industry, and we really look forward to seeing your research continue to unfold at the University of Guelph. So again, thanks so much for joining us and sharing some insights into some of these tools this morning, Dr. Correndo.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really like this interaction, and I hope to develop collaborations.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Okay. With that, after such an informative and engaging morning, I'm pleased to introduce Gord Speck-Snyder, who's an OSCA board member and chair of the research committee. Gord will provide some closing remarks for us today. So welcome, Gord.
Thanks very much, Andrea, and appreciate being here and appreciate the invitation. It was cool to see on the chat at the beginning so many people from all over the place. I understand there's even someone joining us from Hawaii, so appreciate you taking some time out of your vacation to join us. This has been a very cool session. Been awesome stuff. I've been busy scratching down notes, which is always a good sign of an effective meeting. Unfortunately, it also means I have a big page of scratched notes here that I have to decipher as I give to you. So wish me a bit of luck here. As mentioned, part of my role at Soil and Crop is to sit on the research committee. And in that role, it's exciting to see the research programs expanding. And the on-farm program fits in really well with what we're trying to achieve. High on our list of research priorities is to better understand the impact of different management systems and how they impact soil health. And I think we can all agree that soil health is a pretty big term. It's somewhat abstract and it's kind of tough to nail it down to one definition. And truthfully, we're having trouble trying to figure out how to measure it. So I see the soil health conversation actually shifting a little bit, at least from a farming perspective, towards trying to identify what soil functions are limiting. For example, if I'm not getting a good score on the SLAKES test that Dr. Riki shared with us, why not? You know, what's preventing my soil from developing those water stable aggregates? And so, in other words, what do I need to do to ensure my soil is functioning so it can support the crops that I want to grow? And similar for water. I mean, how do I manage the soil or the rain and the snow that I'm lucky enough to get? So I appreciate the discussion and the ongoing research at the Conservation Authority to try to break that stuff apart, to try to figure out what we can do to manage our soils and prevent movement of water that we don't want to move too far away from our ground, and also the movement of nutrients. Norm, buddy, you did a great job of managing that and moderating that discussion. Thanks to you and to your panel members today. I'm convinced that, you know, some of our lighter ground, that water holding and field capacity is one of our limiting factors for sure. I suspect on some of our heavier ground, it's more of a conversation around infiltration. But you guys provided a lot of great insights on, you know, how to identify some of the red flags in our fields and what we might think about to do to improve on things. And also just wanted to give a shout out to and echo the comments about the YEN program. I was lucky enough to be part of it this past growing season, and I've already got my box there in the corner for my for the season coming up. And as Norm said, I mean, the reports that come out of it, the information you get, the benchmarking of your field against others, it is really, really cool. And it's this kind of information that you guys have provided today that empowers us as farmers to get out there and, you know, pay more attention to what's going on in our fields, identify the problems, and think about how we might find some solutions to the problems. But oftentimes, as been touched on today too, it's easy to get bogged down with this just reams of information that's available these days, and it's tough to take research results and try to figure out the context in which they were achieved, and to figure out from there what might be applicable on our own farms. So I think we need to better understand the context, as I said, of those research results. And some of these tools that we've been talking about today are very, very helpful in that respect. I mean, the dashboard for the on-farm program, you can sort of slice and dice the data, and you can narrow the things down to, for example, the soil type that's closer to what you see on your own farm. And Dr. Correndo was kind enough to spend some time with the Soil and Crop board the other day, and I was just, you know, blown away by the stuff that he's working on and the tools that he's developing and the implementations of narrowing the results that are out there to figure out what's applicable, what we can use in our own farms. So very cool stuff. Thanks for that. I'm very pleased that on-farm is being extended to 2028 so that we can build on the work that's already been done in the last 4 years, and we can explore new regions, we can look at new research, and continue to answer the questions that are on the top of mind for farmers. Very cool to understand things as they change over time, as has been said. Sometimes you don't see these results very quickly, so these long-term programs are super, super important. I'm just going to take another minute. I know I'm a little bit over time here, but on behalf of Soil and Crop, I just want to take another minute here to recognize the contributions of several individuals that have been part of this on-farm program and for this forum specifically. First, thank you to Cale Selby on the Environmental Management Branch for your welcoming remarks. And of course, to Amaf for your generous and ongoing support for this program. To Angie, who makes everything at Soil and Crop Research tick. Thank you very much for all your efforts. Thank you too to Dr. Riki, who joined us today all the way from Iowa, so that's much appreciated. And of course, to our keynote speaker, Dr. Crendo. I look forward to learning a lot more about what you're working on. Finally, thank you to the dedicated group of researchers at the Upper Thames River, the Lower Thames Valley, and the Oswego Bayfield Conservation Authorities, and the Soil Research Group, of course, as well as all the amazing network, the network of participating farmers in the on-farm program. You know, without your participation, none of this happens. So thank you very much. So I guess I better hand off the mic here. So I will do so. Thanks very much to the team at Wilton Consulting. You're the guys that helps make sure this forum happens and is run smoothly year after year. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Gord. I know that we gave you a tall ask to help wrap things up, such an action-packed morning in just a few minutes, but you provided a great recap and insightful reflections about our time together this morning. In order to stick with our promise of getting things wrapped up by noon, I'm going to shift the order of things around just a little bit. So for those of you who are participants in OFCAP or CCAs, if you'd like to hang back for a couple of minutes, but I'm just going to share some closing remarks for everyone else first. But again, CCAs and participants in OFCAP, if you'd like to hang back, we can make sure that you get the QR codes that you need to capture your participation today. So on behalf of OSCIA, I would really like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for the forum. And thank you for such enthusiastic engagement in the chat. It's been great to see the conversation flowing, and I look forward to reviewing in closer detail once the event is over. Please visit the OnFarm website for more information and updates, including the forum